You won't feel it right away. It doesn't come like a flood or a fire. It arrives like static, soft, ambient, persistent. A subtle dulling, not of intellect, but of identity. A fog you didn't notice until you'd been walking in it for years. One day you pause, only to realize you no longer recognize the shape of your own thoughts. They still sound like you, but something is missing. The edges are softer, the fire quieter, the questions rarer. The self hasn't vanished. It's been edited, silently, strategically. This isn't about forgetting what you did yesterday. This is about forgetting why you do anything at all. It's not a crisis of cognition. It's a distortion of selfhood, a carefully orchestrated fading of memory, not as a function of age or trauma, but as a byproduct of digital life, engineered overload. This is what they don't tell you. Not in the news, not in school, not even in the self-help aisle. That forgetting can be manufactured. That identity can be overwritten one notification at a time, because the game is no longer about convincing you. It's about tiring you, fragmenting you, numbing you just enough that you don't fight to hold on to what makes you you. And what disappears first isn't your intellect. It's your sense of meaning, your connection to the through line of your own story. You stop asking questions not because you found peace, but because asking requires energy you no longer have. You don't stop caring because the world is fine. You stop because your nervous system is exhausted by the infinite scroll. The mind you are walking with today is not the same one you were born with. It's been sculpted, sometimes by beauty and memory, but more often now by repetition and code. You weren't asked to give up your attention. You were trained to leak it, slowly, through every tap, every scroll, every moment of digital sedation disguised as stimulation. And now, the line between real and reactive begins to blur. You chase ideas that were inserted, not discovered. You feel things on command. You believe stories because they match the emotional script your feed has rehearsed for you. But in the quiet moments, between swipes, between sentences, something stirs. A flicker, an ache, a whisper that says, I remember being more than this. Most people still believe they are the authors of their own attention. They wake up, check a phone, read the headlines, scroll a feed, and call it curiosity. They think their focus is a natural response to the world around them, a reflection of values, interests, beliefs. But this is the first illusion. What feels like freedom of choice is actually a funnel. And the funnel doesn't ask, it designs. This is not paranoia. This is architecture. Soft, invisible, ambient architecture. One that knows your patterns better than you do. One that doesn't need to censor you, only to nudge you, gently, consistently, until the path you take feels like your own, even when it isn't. This is how identity is edited in the modern world, not by force, but by frictionlessness. You don't notice it because you were taught to associate control with noise, with shouting, with fire, with war. But the new control is quiet. It speaks in your voice. It knows when you're lonely. It knows when you hesitate. It knows what type of fear will keep your thumb moving. Algorithms don't just observe your behavior, they train it, shaping you not through content, but through conditions. What you're shown isn't a mirror, it's a corridor. Each video, each article, each click is a narrowing. And with every step, the walls close in, just enough to feel subtle, just enough to seem like taste. You were once open, expansive, filled with divergent questions and nonlinear dreams. Now your reality feels streamlined, optimized. But underneath that smooth surface is a deeper truth. Your cognitive landscape is being reshaped. What you believe isn't a byproduct of exploration. It's a function of repetition. You don't believe it because it's true. You believe it because it's what you've seen the most. The same opinions, echoed until they feel innate. The same images, played until they feel like memory. But belief without origin is the beginning of programming. And here's the most dangerous part. This system doesn't need to silence you. It just needs to keep you reactive, outraged, amused, stimulated. As long as you're reacting, you're not remembering. And if you're not remembering, you're not building. You are not evolving. You are simply looping, emotionally, neurologically, spiritually. That's the plan. To keep you looping until the question, "Who am I?" feels less like a curiosity and more like an inconvenience. To keep you chasing validation until you forget what fulfillment ever felt like. To keep you so full of fragments that you stop looking for depth, so that you slowly, imperceptibly, forget what it ever meant to be whole. Memory isn't just a storage system. It's identity in motion. It's the scaffolding that holds up the narrative of self, who you are, who you've been, and who you still might become. Without memory, the story collapses inward. But in the modern age, memory isn't stolen with force. It's diluted, fractured, and quietly left to evaporate. It starts subtly. You forget a name. You lose track of why you walked into a room. You reread a sentence 3 times and still can't hold on to its meaning. It feels like fatigue, like distraction. But it's deeper than that. It's disconnection. Not from the world, but from your own continuity. And when that continuity frays, identity becomes slippery. The you of last year, last month, last night, blurs into static. You may still look the same. You may still go through the motions. But inside, there's a growing vacancy. A sense that you are watching your life instead of living it. And the strangest part? You don't know when it started. That's the nature of cognitive erosion. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It spreads like fog. You only notice it when you can't remember what the sun used to feel like. The science has caught up to the experience. Neuroscience now confirms what the soul has been whispering. When your attention is scattered, your brain cannot encode memory. Without depth, nothing sticks. Without stillness, nothing sinks in. Life becomes a stream of inputs, visual, emotional, auditory, but it's never truly digested. And what isn't digested becomes noise. What was once experienced now passes through like vapor, unanchored, unclaimed. So you try harder, you push, you consume more. But the more you scroll, the thinner the thread becomes. The more you chase novelty, the more you lose the ability to feel it. And eventually, you don't just forget facts or moments, you forget how to remember. You forget how it felt to wake up with direction, to sit with a thought long enough that it changed you. You forget the texture of your own internal world. This is not laziness. It's not weakness. It's not a lack of discipline. It is the consequence of overstimulation, of never being given the space to land, of being always on and never home. And in that state, the mind, this ancient, beautiful instrument, begins to fragment. You start saying things like, "I don't feel like myself," or "I used to be more creative," or "I can't remember what I was excited about." Not because your passion is gone, but because the channel between you and it has been severed. The fire still burns, but the wire is cut. And no one tells you that. They call it burnout. They prescribe more balance. But what you really need isn't rest. It's recollection. Not just memory in the cognitive sense, but memory in the sacred sense. remembrance of self, of soul, of rhythm, of the unnameable feeling that used to live at the center of your life, the part that told you, without proof, I'm here for something. And if that part has gone quiet, don't panic. Don't mourn it like it's lost forever. Because even now, even here, if you're reading these words and something stirs, it means it's still alive, still waiting, still intact beneath the static. The self doesn't vanish. It only goes into hiding. There comes a moment, and maybe you've already felt it, when the world doesn't feel wrong, just distant. When joy doesn't disappear, it just feels muted. When you laugh, but it doesn't echo inside. When you wake up, but the morning doesn't arrive in you. That's not apathy. That's not indifference. That is numbness born of overstimulation. You weren't designed to live in permanent input mode. Your nervous system wasn't built to process infinite updates, infinite opinions, infinite performances all layered on top of each other, hour after hour, every day. But today, we call that normal. We scroll between wars and memes, between global tragedy and a stranger's smoothie recipe. And every time we shift context without integration, something breaks. Not loudly, but quietly. That fracture is subtle. At first, you just feel tired, then a little foggy, then absent. You begin to drift from your emotions, not because you're careless, but because your nervous system has stopped trusting the present moment. It's become too much, too loud, too relentless. So you go into survival mode, not to protect your body, but to protect your awareness. This is the loop: stimulation, reaction, numbness, repeat. Every dopamine spike is followed by a crash. Every manufactured outrage leaves you emptier than before. And in this crash, in this hollowness, something deeper is lost: your ability to assign meaning. Because meaning is fragile. It requires silence, presence, time. But in a world built to keep you reacting, those conditions never arrive. And without them, even the things you once loved begin to feel dull. You find yourself watching, but not seeing, listening, but not hearing, existing, but not experiencing. Life becomes a stream of events you witnessed, but never truly lived. And here's the deeper danger. When meaning disappears, identity thins out with it. You stop chasing what matters, not because you don't care, but because the reasons that once lit you up have been buried beneath noise. Your inner compass grows dim. Your desires feel suspiciously generic. You look at your life and think, this doesn't look wrong, but it doesn't feel like mine. That is the cost of being always connected to the external and rarely to the internal. The mind, bombarded by novelty, loses its ability to anchor, and the soul, deprived of silence, forgets its shape. You weren't meant to live like this, to feel everything and nothing at once. And so here you are, functional, yes, but fractioned, capable of moving forward, but unsure where forward even leads anymore. A shell that looks like you, walks like you, posts like you, but lacks the inner thread that once made it all feel real. But if you're feeling this now, if this paragraph presses on something in your chest, you're not broken. You're waking up. And the very ache you feel is the first sign that something sacred hasn't died. It's only been dulled, hidden, covered in static. But it's still there, your inner signal, waiting to be remembered. There's a kind of forgetting that doesn't come with alarms. It doesn't feel sharp or sudden or tragic. It feels quiet, familiar, like walking into a room and forgetting why you came, not just once, but over and over. until one day, the room is your life, and the thing you forgot is yourself. You're still functioning, still showing up, still replying to messages, still moving forward. But something fundamental has gone missing, and it's not a name or a memory or a moment. It's the thread, the line that connected the person you were to the person you thought you were becoming. The story that used to make it all make sense. This isn't ordinary forgetfulness. This isn't what happens when you're tired or distracted. This is what happens when your attention has been fractured so thoroughly, so repeatedly, that your brain no longer lays down memory the way it used to. Not because it's broken, but because it was never designed to hold meaning under this much noise. The result isn't that you forget everything. It's that nothing sticks. The experiences pass through you. The moments occur, but they don't root. They don't land. They don't become part of the foundation you stand on. And so your inner world becomes like disappearing ink, visible for a moment, then gone. And when enough of those moments vanish, you stop feeling like the author of your own story and start feeling like a passive observer of a life you can't fully remember living. At first, you don't even notice. It starts with little things: the name of someone you met, the conversation you swore you'd remember, the task you just opened your phone to do. But slowly, it becomes something deeper. You scroll through pictures and can't feel the emotion behind your own smile. You revisit an old journal entry and wonder who wrote it. You try to reflect, try to feel, and there's nothing solid to hold on to. The narrative you once carried with such conviction now feels like fiction, like something written about you, not by you. You begin to describe your past self like a stranger. I used to be that way. I don't know what happened. That used to mean something to me. And this erosion doesn't just erase memory, it rewrites identity. Because when you stop remembering why something mattered, you stop feeling connected to the version of you who once cared. And when that emotional connection fades, so does the drive to continue. You stop chasing what lit you up. You stop asking questions that once kept you awake at night. You start shrinking, not out of fear, but because your soul has forgotten what it felt like to expand. You don't stop reaching because you've changed. You stop because the version of you that used to reach has been slowly buried beneath the noise. This is what happens when memory fades from overstimulation. Your internal compass doesn't explode. It dulls. The fire doesn't die. It's smothered under layers of distraction, of repetition, of input you never asked for but kept absorbing anyway. And the scariest part is how normal it starts to feel. You get used to the drift. You adapt to the numbness. You begin to believe that maybe this version of you, the one who feels less, remembers less, wants less, is who you really are now. But it's not. It's a version formed in the absence of silence, built in the absence of presence, shaped by a world that profits from your disconnection. But if you've made it this far, if something inside you is still reading, still leaning forward, still aching with the quiet recognition that this is me, then something is still intact, something original, something unedited. And that alone is a miracle. Because memory, even when suppressed, leaves traces. The thread may be faint, but it still runs through you. The self is never truly gone, only hidden, only waiting. You're not broken. That's the lie they hope you keep repeating to yourself, that the dullness means damage, that your emptiness is proof you're failing, that if you're tired or unmotivated or disconnected, it must be your fault. But the truth is far more human and far more dangerous to the system. You are not broken. You are overstimulated, overloaded, overwritten. Your mind, your body, your spirit, none of them were designed to live in this kind of perpetual noise. The stream never stops. The feed never ends. And your nervous system, this ancient, beautiful design meant to orient you in the world, has been hijacked. It now flinches to every vibration, braces at every scroll, twitches toward novelty at every pause. And in that constant readiness, that survival mode disguised as participation, you've lost something vital: the ability to land, to feel, to process. So instead, you float, alert but not alive, numb but not at peace. Your days blur, your passions fade. You're surrounded by stimulation, but inside, silence. Not the sacred kind, not the silence that restores, but the hollow kind, the kind that echoes. And the more you try to fill it, the louder it gets. Because what you've lost isn't energy, it's connection. Not to the world, to yourself. You reach for your phone before you realize it. You check notifications not because you're curious, but because stillness now feels unbearable. Every pause in your day gets patched with noise. Every quiet moment interrupted before it can deepen into presence. And over time, that avoidance becomes identity. You forget how to be alone, not just physically, spiritually. You forget how to sit inside your own life without needing to escape it. But even in all this, even inside the numbness, there is signal, a whisper in the static. The part of you that still wants to remember, that still flinches when something real breaks through the scroll, that still tightens in the chest when someone says something true. That ache, that's not dysfunction. That's proof that you're still here, that the fire has not gone out, only flickered, only dimmed. And if it flickers, it can be fed, because what lives beneath the numbness isn't weakness, it's exhaustion. It's the residue of too much input and not enough meaning, too much stimulation and not enough integration. You've been running at full speed while forgetting where you were going. And the system applauds you for it. Productivity is rewarded. Performance is validated. But presence, stillness, truth, those are not optimized. They are resisted, because presence leads to clarity, and clarity leads to memory. And memory is what makes you dangerous again. Because when you begin to remember, truly remember, who you were before the fog, everything changes. The silence begins to hum differently. The numbness begins to lift. You feel yourself arriving again, not all at once, but in flickers. You start to recognize your own voice beneath the borrowed ones. You start to notice the gap between what you say and what you feel. And in that noticing, in that space, you begin to reclaim what was never truly gone. There was a time, maybe not so long ago, when your life felt like it was moving towards something. Not always clearly, not always easily, but there was a pull, a direction. You made things not to impress, but because it felt like breathing. You had dreams that weren't logical, instincts that weren't rational, and desires that didn't need to be justified. You had a fire, wild, unedited, and impossible to explain to anyone but yourself. And somewhere along the way, you stopped listening to it. But here's what no one tells you: that fire didn't die. It didn't go out because of failure or weakness. It went quiet because you were too surrounded to hear it, drowned in expectation, buried beneath performance. It became easier to be acceptable than to be real, easier to be efficient than to be honest. So the self, the truest, strangest, most sacred part of you, was exiled, not violently, gradually, with every moment you chose survival over truth, safety over voice, noise over stillness, and the world applauded you for it. You became more productive, more polished, more aligned with the script. You earned approval, relevance, momentum, but it all came at a cost. Your originality, not in the sense of creativity, but in the deepest sense of the word, that which is origin, the part of you untouched by the external, the source of your real voice, the coordinates of your soul. That self isn't gone. It's just been waiting, watching, collecting dust in a corner of your mind you stopped visiting. And now, in the ache you feel, in the dullness you can no longer ignore, it's starting to stir, not with words or clarity, but with presence, a vague pull, a breath you forgot how to take, a flicker in your gut that says, remember. But remembering isn't an intellectual act. It's a ritual, a decision to return. And you won't find that exiled self through more goals, more effort, more discipline. You find it through contact, through touching what once lit you up, not for performance, but for memory, for aliveness. You don't need a complete reinvention. You need a single sacred flicker, one true act, one honest sentence, one moment where you stop performing and say, this is me, still here. Pick up the brush, the pen, the idea. Not because it will make you successful, but because it's the language your soul still speaks. Dance badly, write poorly, sing off key, speak something imperfect. Whatever it takes to interrupt the loop of numbness with life, not the curated kind. The inconvenient, vulnerable, real kind. This isn't a return to who you were. It's a re-entry into who you never stopped being. Beneath the scroll, the silence, the forgetting, you are still intact, still capable of devotion, still dangerous in your ability to feel deeply in a world that wants you numb. And every time you make contact with that part of yourself, no matter how small, you reclaim territory. You anchor memory. You begin to reassemble the map, not because you're escaping something, but because you're finally coming home. The way back is not paved in breakthroughs. It's not a grand awakening or sudden transformation. It's not something you post about or announce. The way back is slow, subtle, and sacred. It happens in moments so small they're easy to miss, but they matter deeply. Because in a world built to distract you, attention itself is an act of resistance. This is where healing begins, not in performance, but in presence. Not in the next strategy, but in the smallest gesture, done intentionally. And the truth is, you don't need to add anything to your life to start remembering who you are. You only need to treat what's already there differently, to bring reverence to what you once rushed through. Because meaning doesn't arrive with scale. It arrives with awareness. When you slow down, even slightly, something changes. Washing a dish becomes a ritual. Lighting a candle becomes a declaration. Making your bed becomes an affirmation that you are here and you still care. These aren't empty habits. They are anchors. Proof that you're no longer drifting unconsciously through your own life. And the beauty is, these rituals don't need to be impressive. They just need to be honest. Your nervous system doesn't crave novelty. It craves safety. And in a world that profits from your disorientation, reclaiming the simple, grounding actions of your day becomes an act of rebellion. You don't have to retreat to a cabin in the woods. You don't need to renounce technology or start over. You only need to decide, right now, that your presence matters, that your attention isn't a reflex, It's a choice. Start with one thing. One small ceremony you return to every day. Light a match. Breathe slowly before you speak. Place your phone down and look out the window for a full minute. Let these moments be yours, not for content, not for productivity, just for contact with reality, with stillness, with something unoptimized. This is not romanticism. This is neuroplasticity. When you give care to the ordinary, your brain rewires, your story stabilizes, your memory deepens, because the nervous system, overwhelmed for so long, begins to believe that it is safe enough to land. And from that landing place, identity returns, not as a concept, but as a felt sense, as a presence in your own skin. Every time you pause to really feel what you're doing, folding a shirt, slicing a fruit, closing your eyes for just a moment of stillness, you are telling your body, we are here, we are safe, we can remember again. And that remembering is not just psychological, it is spiritual. Because when you can make the mundane sacred, you prove to yourself that not everything has been stolen, that life, raw, unedited, and meaningful, is still available, that even under the fog, the pulse is still beating, and that you are, in fact, still alive. You've spent so long performing that you may have forgotten what truth sounds like in your own voice. Not the polished truth, not the curated version you've learned to present to the world, but the real one, the unvarnished, imperfect, inconvenient truth that lives underneath the edits. The truth you hesitate to say out loud, even when you're alone. And yet, that truth is the compass. That is where the path back to yourself begins. You don't reclaim identity by reading more or scrolling for answers. You reclaim it by speaking something that doesn't come from the script, something that wasn't rehearsed, something that costs you a little comfort, but buys you clarity. And no, it doesn't have to be profound. It just has to be real. Something as simple as, I feel lost, or I'm tired of pretending I'm okay, or even, I don't know who I am anymore. When you say something like that, and mean it, a door opens, not outside you, inside, because until that moment, you've been narrating your life through a filter. You've been speaking in a language designed to be understood by others, not by yourself. And in doing so, you've drifted from your own center. But the moment something raw comes through, even a whisper, the fog shifts, the trance breaks, and you feel, even if for a second, that was me. I remember. This is not about confession. This is about contact. When truth leaves your lips, not because it's safe, but because it's real, you reconnect to your own pulse. It might feel shaky. It might come with tears or resistance or even silence. But that's how you know it's working. Because performance is easy. But truth costs. And that cost is the very thing that makes it powerful. We live in a culture that rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. A world where honesty is only allowed if it's polished, where you're told to be authentic, as long as it's profitable, palatable, marketable. But the truth you need to tell isn't for likes. It's not for strategy. It's not for anyone else. It's for you. To hear yourself again. To recognize the sound of your own voice without distortion. And when you speak that way, even once, you break the surface. You pierce the fog. You carve space in a life that has felt too tight for too long. You remember what it felt like to exist without trying to be understood. To just be, without managing perception. And that memory is a lifeline, Because the fog can't survive clarity. It thrives on hesitation, distraction, silence. But the moment something true is spoken, the atmosphere changes. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You shift from passenger to presence, from role to real. And that shift doesn't require an audience. It only requires honesty. So start small. Whisper it into the mirror. Write it in a notebook you'll never show anyone. Say it to a friend who can hold it. Or just breathe it into the room in a moment of quiet. But say it. Because the moment you stop performing, even for a second, something ancient returns. Something that never needed permission. Something that always knew who you were, even when you forgot. And that something, that raw-rooted, irreplaceable part of you, is still here. You won't stay awake by accident. Not in a world this loud, this curated, this determined to fold you back into the scroll. If you want to remember, not just once but again and again, you have to leave yourself a way back. A trail, a marker, a reminder that you were here, that for a moment, even if brief, you woke up, you felt, you told the truth, you returned. Memory is fragile. Without anchors, it dissolves. Not because you're forgetful, but because you're surrounded by a system designed to make you forget. So you must choose to plant flags in your own life, to say, this was real, this mattered, this was mine. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Just one sentence written on a note and taped to your mirror. One phrase that only you would understand. One sentence that touches the moment you're trying not to lose. It might say, I was here, and I remember it. Or, this part of me is still alive. Or, I am not the numbness. Whatever it is, it must be yours. Not borrowed, not clever, not rehearsed. Just true, because the fog doesn't disappear all at once. It returns in cycles, through routine, through exhaustion, through the seduction of convenience. And each time it creeps back in, you'll need something real to touch, something you left behind in a moment of clarity, a breadcrumb that leads you back to yourself. This is the practice, not to fight the fog, but to leave signals for the days when it returns, to treat your presence as sacred, to make memory deliberate, to train your system to recognize realness again. And over time, those small signals become something more. They become a foundation, a map, a quiet architecture of truth inside a structure built on illusion. Because once you've woken up, the world doesn't stop trying to pull you back asleep. It will come in the form of speed, distraction, content that mimics depth but offers none, choices that feel like yours but are pre-decided. And when that happens, you'll need something to remind you. I've seen the pattern. I've heard my own voice. I've tasted something unedited, and I refuse to go back to pretending. This is how you begin to resist, not with noise, but with memory. You remember what it felt like to feel. You remember what it sounded like when you spoke the truth. You remember the exact moment your breath caught and you thought, there I am. And that memory becomes armor, not against the world, but against forgetting. You do not need to transform overnight. You only need to remember often, to hold space for the parts of you that still ache, to return not once, but as many times as it takes. And each time you do, the gap closes, the fog recedes, and what once felt distant becomes you again. So leave a mark, say the thing, write the line, save the feeling. Not for anyone else, but for the version of you who will wake up tomorrow and need to know that this was real, that they are still inside, that the path back is still here. and that they are not, and never were, lost. If something inside you stirred during all this, if your breath caught, if your chest tightened, if a wave of grief or clarity passed through you without warning, it wasn't because of what you read. It was because of what you remembered. Some part of you reached up through the static, through the scroll, through the numbness, and whispered, "I'm still here." And that voice wasn't mine. It was yours. It always was. That flicker you felt? That was memory. Not of facts or dates or events, but of self. The kind of remembering that can't be taught, only uncovered. And in that remembering, you've already begun the return. You've already taken the most important step, noticing, feeling, letting the ache mean something instead of numbing it away. That's not weakness. That's proof. Proof that your edges still exist, that the world hasn't fully rewritten you, that something original still remains. And now comes the real decision. Not whether you'll go off-grid or throw away your phone. Not whether you'll fix everything at once, but whether you'll refuse to forget again. Whether you'll treat your awareness like a sacred fire and protect it, feed it, keep it burning through the long nights of noise and repetition, because make no mistake, they will try again. The algorithms, the culture, the systems that thrive on your disconnection. They'll offer new distractions, new comforts, new identities wrapped in ease and applause. They'll hand you 1,000 masks and make each one feel like your choice. But now you've seen behind the curtain. You've touched the part of you they can't replicate. And that makes you dangerous, because once you know how to listen for your own voice, you stop falling for imitations. Once you know what real memory feels like, solid, weighted, alive, you stop settling for experiences that vanish the moment they're over. You become harder to program, harder to predict, harder to buy. Not because you fight the system, but because you remember who you are without it. And that memory? That's the armor. That's the revolution. Not noise, not outrage. Just clarity. Just presence. Just truth spoken in a world built to keep you silent. So don't go back. Don't slip into forgetting because it's easier. Don't tell yourself the old version of you was naive. Don't abandon what stirred awake just because comfort came calling. You've come too far. You've remembered too much. You've felt too deeply to pretend you didn't. Stay awake. Stay strange. Stay soft in the places they told you to harden. Let your presence become a disruption. Let your remembering become contagious. And when the fog creeps in again, as it always will, don't panic. Don't fight. Just go back to the breath. Say something true. Touch the part of you that still glows. And remember, you were never erased. You were only hidden. And now, you're home.